We're going to take some notes on environmental value systems. We'll fill in these blanks on the first page as we go through the notes, and then when we get to the back you can fill in this chart and answer these two questions. So what we should be able to do by the end of this set of notes is be able to describe the three main types of environmental value systems. What I want you to think about are the different ways that we can place value on the environment. There are two main ways that we can place value on the environment, the first of which being intrinsic value. If we approach the environment from an intrinsic value standpoint, we would realize that ecological processes such as nutrient cycling or metabolism, they have no formal value on their own. They're not worth any money. An intrinsic standpoint may come from a philosophical, spiritual, or ethical perspective. And we would say that nature has intrinsic value simply because it exists. We could also approach environmental value from what we call an extrinsic standpoint, which would place formal value on aspects of the environment. For example, what if we took resources, we bought them, we sold them, they could be worth money. This would be extrinsic value. On your paper, you've got that little T-chart there. Let's go ahead and fill in these definitions. Intrinsic value, this would be the value just because it exists. And extrinsic value, this would be the use value that humans apply to things. A good way to remember the definitions here: intrinsic, you can remember intrinsic, inside value, and extrinsic, external value. So something I want you to think about, something that we should be able to do by the time we get done with these notes, is distinguish between intrinsic and extrinsic value. We'll move on and we'll talk about actual environmental value systems. So the definition is there. A lot of times we abbreviate this, we say EVS for environmental value systems. Definition would be a worldview that shapes the way people perceive and evaluate environmental issues. Now this comes from several different factors. It would come from a person's education. It would come from personal beliefs of that person's family, for example. And also it would come from the ways that you take this information and you process it. So based on this particular worldview that you have, that you possess, you would apply different values to different components of the biosphere or the environment itself. And this can influence the different decisions that you make regarding the environment. Now, your particular environmental value system can be influenced by many different factors. Things such as the culture, media, religion, education, and politics that surround you. And entire countries or societies' decisions, perspectives, and actions can be influenced or determined by their particular environmental value system. Another thing I want you to think about is what might happen if we have two neighboring countries. They're right next to each other, and they have drastically or vastly different environmental value systems. What types of problems could this pose? The IB recognizes three main types of EVSs, and two of those have their own particular subgroups. So we're going to take a closer look at that. We'll go ahead and fill in the three-column chart using the information on the next couple slides. The first one we're going to take a look at is an ecocentric perspective. So someone with an ecocentric EVS would be the most nature-centered of the three. Also, they would view ecology and life to be central to their viewpoints. An ecocentric worldview would be viewed as holistic, meaning that humans are interconnected with nature as well as ecological processes. They believe in a minimum disturbance of nature. Or in other words, humans depend on nature to survive, and we shouldn't really mess with it. The ecocentric perspective can be divided into what we call deep ecologists and soft ecologists. So at the far end of the spectrum, the most hardcore ecocentrists would be the deep ecologists. They would say that natural laws dictate human mortality. They believe that nature has its own rights, its bio rights, and they would say that nature has more value than human rights. Then you have the soft ecologists, and these would focus on activism or community action to influence political policies and practices. And they also take, similarly to the deep ecologists, but to a lesser extent, they would be anti-materialistic. So they view materialism and our need for more and more things as wrong. So another thing that we should be able to do when we get done with these notes is be able to describe the ecocentric EVS and the two subgroups of the ecocentric EVS. So moving on to the next main type of environmental value system, we have the technocentric. So these would be technology-centered. They believe that technological developments can provide solutions to many of our environmental problems. They believe that humans should be managing the planet or the environment with our technology. They believe that any environmental issues that show up we can solve through technology, and that humans are the Earth's most important species and we're in charge. Technocentrics can be divided into two subgroups. We have the cornucopians and the environmental managers. The cornucopians believe that man can always find a way out of any difficulty. Cornucopians tend to see the world as having infinite resources to benefit humans. Cornucopians tend to believe that capitalism and the free market system is the best way to manage both economics and environment in society. And this is what sets them apart from the other branch of the technocentrics, which are the environmental managers. The environmental managers think that economic growth and resource use can continue as long as adjustments are made along the way. So these adjustments could be made in the form of policies, taxes, laws, or other legislation. In other words, the government would need to step in periodically to make sure that the environment is not exploited. So we should make sure that we're able to describe the technocentric environmental value system. So the last main type of EVS would be the anthropocentric viewpoint. This viewpoint is the most people-centric of the three. In other words, humans are not dependent on nature, but nature is there to benefit humankind. Similarly to an environmental manager, anthropocentrists see humans as responsible for sustaining the earth, and they would do this through control of population, resource use, and again, they could use taxes or other legislation to attain these goals. The last thing we should be able to do at the end of these notes is describe the anthropocentric environmental value system. So at this point, we should hopefully be able to determine which of the three environmental value systems you feel you most identify with and why. So this brings us to the back side of our note paper, which has the first thing here is this chart. So what you're going to do here is in the for column, you're going to write the specific EVS that would be the most in favor of that particular question. And in the against column, you're going to write the EVS that would be the most against that particular question. For example, the first one, should we use windmills to produce more energy? Which EVS would hold that stance the strongest, and which would be the most against it? For the read and respond questions, notice that we have several lines underneath each one. These should be well-constructed paragraph responses. So we should be using up most of or all of those lines underneath each question. So you are going to need to read the first chapter of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring that starts here and it ends right here. And you'll go ahead and fill in your responses based on that chapter.